Welcome to The Right Approach. We are your hosts. I am J.W. Judge, and with me is Barbara Hinske. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft of writing as we explore a new topic every week. And our topic today is a continuation of something we started in episode 1 and promised to come back to, and that is deciding what to write next. But before we do that, let's do personal updates about our writing craft and business, because it's been a few weeks since we've had that. So Barbara, what's going on with you?
So I'm in the middle of some releases on on September 29th. My book in the Wishing Tree series, called Wishes of Home. It's book 12 in that connected series with a group of other women's fiction authors. We've created a fictional town called Linden Falls, Connecticut, sort of like Stars Hollow in the Gilmore Girls. We get a lot of reviews that say that. So it's been a fun collaborative project. We have shared characters and shared locales, which has created its own challenges to get 8 people on the same page on all that, but it's done very well. A lot of readers say they want to move to Linden Falls. I know I want to move to Linden Falls. So Wishes of Home. And then
can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, of
All right.
course.
Is the town totally made up?
Yes, totally made up. Yeah.
So all of y'all had to be together on the same page about like locales within the town and how it's set up and all that, right?
Yes. How we did that was we created a private Facebook group for the authors, and we had some shared documents, settings, and characters. So we had to make sure nobody killed off a certain character, or everybody had to make sure who was married and who their kids were. And it was based upon an actual town that we could all research, and there were links in there that I can't remember the name of that town. Charming, obviously, but it's been a lot of work. We have to communicate and put plot lines down. Nobody has time to read. One of the authors has read all of the books, all 13 of them now. Wow. Which is a lot. Our first book is a free book that has a prequel to each of the first books in the first series. So it's been gratifying and a lot of fun and a lot of work. I don't know as I'll do it again, but I've loved doing it this time. So maybe if there's ever an interest, we can do a podcast about how you actually get this sort of thing going, because we have contracts that we signed. And I mean, from a business perspective, it is a lot.
Well, I can only imagine, because earlier this year, I had looked at and put some work into putting together a short story anthology. And some of it was with authors who had been previously published, and some of it was going to be people who hadn't been published before. And there was a lot of interest, but when it came to the actual doing, it came apart because we just didn't have enough entries. And I wrote mine, and I will say it is probably one of my favorite things that I've written, is the short story that I wrote for it. And it is, I'm totally jumping in on this was supposed to be your time to talk about it. But it's a short story that I went ahead and released on Amazon exclusively, called The Murder Tree. And in Walker County, Alabama, there is this legend that years and years ago, you could very easily, and this part seems to be true, there's been 60 Minutes stories on it and things of that nature, you can pretty easily hire a hitman for fairly cheap out of Walker County, Alabama. And there was a legend that if you put an envelope of money or a bag of money in this very certain tree with somebody's name on it, they would turn up dead. And so I wrote this story based on this legend about a family of hillbilly hitmen from Walker County, and that was the family business. And so I just really loved it, and I hope that I have ideas for going back to that setting and that family and that world and writing more into it. But anyway, it was a lot of fun, so I went ahead and published it and just really enjoyed it.
That is fascinating. I love hearing that because our in the wishing tree series, there's the linden tree in Vermont where you tie wishes on branches and strings, and then the tree is magic and a little different than Hitman, but
Well, it
I
might be a
but I
wish.
yeah, yeah, might be a wish, but you know what? I have something to say with you about that. My book, The Christmas Club, that was made into a Hallmark movie, was written to be contributed to an anthology that a bunch of us women fiction authors were going to do. We're all going to do a Christmas novella and put an anthology together. Okay. Well, guess who? The only person who wrote the book was me. So I just did like you. I just published it and there we went. And then right away, the screen rights got sold. So
Wow.
I see that. What an engaging topic. So I'm affirming that for you.
Okay.
I am. We'll talk offline about that. We need to get that going. The other thing I have going that I want to talk about is just I have the third book in my Guiding Emily series comes out November 3rd, and it's called Over Every Hurdle. So that's what I've got going on. So tell me about your updates.
So we're recording this in early September, even though it's not coming out until mid October. So I am coming out of the month of August, which was the busiest month of my law practice ever. I mean, in 10 years that I've been practicing, this was the most just grinding month. And so my writing, so we were, there was uh, like 220 billable hours, which averages out to about 55 hours a week. Then
Yeah.
we recorded, I think, 5 or 6 episodes.
Yeah.
I get 5 episodes maybe of this podcast, and I had some other podcast appearances. So somehow I eked out like 3.5 chapters of my fourth novel that I'm working on, but there just wasn't a lot of progress in that front. There was just so much else going on, and I stressed about it at the beginning and the middle of the month because I really enjoy and just covet that writing time, and it wasn't happening. And as the month progressed, I just got okay with knowing, like, look, this is just
Mhm.
the way it is right now, and there's no sense stressing over it because I can't change it. I can't do anything about
Yeah.
it. We're gonna be okay with this. And
Yeah.
so September, we're a weekend, has started. Well, I had like 4 consistent days of writing in a row. And so that was much better than the way I left August.
Yeah.
Um, and so we'll see. I'm about maybe a little over a third, 40% of the way through this book. And still, I have an idea of what the second half of Act Two is going to look like. And I think I have a pretty good idea of how the third act is going to go. So we'll see, although those are always subject to big changes. Every time that I've had a big change, well, in all 3 books that I've had so far, there have all ended up having big changes in the second half of the second act. So something's coming, I'm sure. It will not go according to plan. And so we'll see.
Well, I'm proud of you for just giving yourself some grace on when life interferes, because that happens to all of us. And certainly stressing yourself doesn't help your creativity
Yeah.
whatsoever. Yeah.
Oh, and on top of that, I'm doing a bunch of renovations around our house to try and update things. So, you know, a little busy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
this weekend, I'm going to be installing board and batten in our kitchen.
Oh my goodness.
Um, and so I haven't done that before. My wife and the kids are going out of town. And so
Good deal.
hopefully there will not be any catastrophes. Well,
Yeah.
yes.
There you go. It's nice to have time when because you've got young kids. It's just hard to make progress when you've got young kids
Well, and they
under.
want to help. So they're 4 and 7, and there has been chair rail around the the wall. And so I take the chair rail off, and you have to put joint compound on a couple layers and then sand it down. And they want to help. And so I have to find ways that they can help because I don't want to discourage that. And I do want to teach them how to
Yeah.
be handy because it's something I've kind of had to figure out on my own as I go along here. But it's a little challenging to find ways that they can be actually helpful
Yeah.
um, at this point. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about choosing what to write next. And you and I are in very different stages of our fiction writing careers. And so I think that's going to look very different for you than it has for me because I'm kind of establishing myself or attempting to. And I think we got into this just a little bit in that first episode. So, you mentioned that you've got your third Guiding Emily book coming out. I know you're working on other things. So, when you finish one project, how do you decide what to work on next?
So yeah, and because I am now writing full time, so that gives me a whole different landscape to work from. I have a business plan that I have. As a retired corporate lawyer, business plans are just in my blood. So I do one for my author business. I don't always stick to it. And the past year, because I've tried some of the more collaborative things with other authors to try the Wishing Tree series for one thing, have imposed other writing projects on me. But I think what I'm going to do is write one in my Guiding Emily series a year, one in my Rosemont series, and maybe just one other book, another in my Paws and Pastries series. I might do that. That 3 books a year, one of them is a novella, and then that leaves me time for something else. I think a good, fairly leisurely full-time author routine is writing for a year and no more than that. It's kind of what I'm going for because I have some other things that I do as well.
So, writing 4 projects a year like that, does that give you time? Are we talking about drafting through all the editing and getting it ready?
Okay. Yeah, that's everything. And since I am indie published, I have to do, have the cover, supervise the cover design and all of that. I'm also on the board of Sisters in Crime, so national organization. So that takes some. I'm going to be board president next year, so that takes some time. I usually finish a project and then go to another series, but right now I'm currently almost done. Maybe by Sunday night, I'll have finished the first draft of the 4th book in the Emily series. When I ended book 3 this summer, I thought, I'm into it. I should keep rolling. So that's what I've done, and I'll hold that until next year to publish it. Although, as we're talking about current updates, I write and give my writing process is I work with a writing coach who is my editor, and I will now write maybe 10,000 words in a week and send it to her on Sunday evening. She'll critique it, and then on Tuesday we talk. And it's just been rolling along. Book 3, book 4, everything's been fine. Yeah, this is great. It's working until now I'm almost done. The big scene is a proposal, and I get her comments back on Monday that this falls flat.
Mm.
And it needs to be so good. And I'm like, okay. So that's what I'm doing today is fluffing it up all day. So I don't know. But anyway, we all get the red pencil, and she's right. She's absolutely right. It did fall flat. She is absolutely right. And I need to improve it. So I'm hoping that may stall me from finishing the first draft of this by Sunday night because I do have a busy week ahead too. But anyway, that's kind of how I plan it because I've got more control over it.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. Having a business plan and
Yeah.
deciding, for business purposes that I'm going to work on this project next. Do you feel like that constrains your creativity and forces you into something? And I know that can work 2 ways. Constraining your creativity can limit your choices and be more effective sometimes than having, a blank page.
Yeah.
Or, I guess that's really I kind of lost the train of thought of my question there, but does limiting your choices, is that effective for you, or does it create problems in your writing space?
I think at this point it's effective for me. I don't feel like I ever run out of ideas, and I do have more ideas of things than I have time to write. but I do feel like I've built up a readership now. My Rosemont series, which was my flagship series, which still 10 years into it still sells very well. I haven't written a book in that series, a main book. I wrote up kind of a spinoff, which based upon our talk with Kevin Tomlinson, I think I'm going to do more of that next year. I'm revising my business plan. But I haven't written a main book in the series for 2 years, and I ended with somebody going into labor. So that's not very nice. I got to get this woman has got to have those twins, and we got to move on with it. But I now 8 books in, I kind of was like, well, what else is there to say about the main character? And I'm not going to mention names, but there are some very successful series where I'm like, oh my gosh, there is no character development.
Mm,
I always admired the Robert B. Parker Spencer series because his characters did develop, his relationships did develop through that. So that's what I wanted to do. And I kind of felt like I was stalled a little bit. But after talking to Kevin, I don't know, I've got 70 or 80 characters. And there's a lot of places I can go. And I can even do some cross characters. In my Guiding Emily series has a guide dog in it. And Garth is one of the voices. He's the only character I write first person. I love writing Garth. In my Rosemont series, I have a young man who's had kind of a troubled past, but animals are his salvation, and he decides he's going to learn to become a mobility instructor for the blind and a guide dog trainer. I'm sorry, he's David's going to be a guide dog trainer. And I thought, well, people are saying, well, are you going to have David from Rosemont meet some of Emily's people? And I thought, well, no, I'm not. After talking to Kevin, why wouldn't I?
yeah.
They're both contemporary. It's not like I have to change anybody. So I don't know. That rambled all over the place. How do you feel? How do you plan what you're going to write?
So mine has been very different. And I want to come back. I want to make sure I come back to what you were just talking about there because, and I'm glad to hear we have both thought so much about the conversation that we had with Kevin Tomlinson and like are implementing the,
Yeah.
or at least mulling over how to implement some of those ideas, because that just really reinforces the value. Who am I to say the value that this podcast has, but it has for both of us. So, ideally it would
Absolutely.
to others too. So, all right. So I wrote my first novel, Vulcan Rising, and most of the way through it, I thought it was going to be a single book and then realized, and I don't remember if I realized it during Act 3 or in that second half of Act 2 that I mentioned earlier, that this is going to be a series. And
Mhm.
so I finished it and immediately started the second book, which takes place 12 years later, in a different country. And that took me, so the Vulcan Rising took me 3.5 months to write. It went really quickly. Um, then Seeking Sanctuary, the second book, took 10 or 11, I think maybe 10 months to write. And it just took a great deal longer. It was a busy year. It was harder. I don't know why the second book was harder. It was a different subgenre. It was kind of a serial killer book. I had to do a ton of research and it just took longer. Um, and after I finished that, I needed, I knew immediately where the third book was going to go. The third book, which as we're recording, comes out in 2 weeks, is Forging Bonds. It picks up like minutes later after the second one. But I needed a mental break from, the 15 months or 16 months that I had been working on those stories and those characters. That's when I wrote that short story, The Murder Tree, that we talked about earlier, which was not fantasy, not, it was back to Alabama, which is where Vulcan Rising was set, with places that I knew. Um, I have a bunch of family who kind of fit that hillbilly mold. And so I'm drawing on, things that are much more familiar to me. And, it's 7,000 words or something like that. So it's not a huge story, but it was just such a significant deviation that when I got back to this Zaberi Chronicles series and started writing in that third book, which I knew was going to involve a bunch of research because it's hopping all over the place, like I mentioned in that interview with Kevin. Um, but it was much fresher and I was ready to go. And that one took 6 or 7 months to write too. And then when I was done with that, I wrote a a nonfiction book, it was really more of compiling this nonfiction book, write your novel one day at a time, because so much of it was journal entries that I had done as I was writing and parts of interviews that I had done with you and with other authors, and then compiling ideas about the business of writing and business in general. And I had so much of that already written, and it had to be cleaned up and made into a book
Sure.
format. But it was a very significant deviation. Um, and then I thought, so I finished that this summer, and I thought I would go back to one of the two novels that I had abandoned early on that we had talked about that I've never finished.
Mhm.
But I just couldn't get into those. There was a couple of short stories, or maybe novellas, or maybe there'll be novels that I outlined and plotted a little bit, but I couldn't get into those. One of them is a horror story that is so dark and grim. I think it would be really compelling, but I have quit writing it twice because I can't make myself write it. Um,
Mhm.
so, and then I started writing this fourth novel, which I did not have even in mind until, I'll tell you the catalyst for the story. I was involved in a conversation with a group of parents, and we were talking about the tooth fairy and, children losing teeth and going through that whole thing because all of us have young kids. And one of the parents is, I don't think she would be offended if I described her as peculiar, because I think she pretty well self identifies as that. But she has some very different ideas from me about all the things. We couldn't be more different people. And she made the comment and said, "We don't do casual business with fairies." And it was totally sincere. And that's why they don't do the tooth fairy. And that phrase just stuck in my head of, we don't do
Yeah.
casual business with fairies. And I mean, I didn't do anything with it. I didn't have an idea for a story. It's just that just stuck in my head and kept bringing
Mhm.
itself up. And so then I had this idea of, okay, there's something here, because my brain keeps coming back to this and it's super weird and I'm okay with writing weird things. And so I started writing this story about, okay, what if there are tooth fairies who have evil intentions? And that's the
Um,
story I'm writing now. And it's been really interesting. And I finally have a protagonist who's a lawyer, and his writing skills, I think, and his skills as an analytical thinker are really going to have a significant effect on how the book turns out. And we'll see. I still have a lot of uncertainty about it. It's not what I intended to write, and I've just been figuring out as I go. Um, but so so far, when we talk about what to write next, I haven't had a plan. I have a ton of ideas. I keep a spreadsheet, and I know we've talked about spreadsheets before and what a nerd I am about spreadsheets, but that's where I keep my story ideas, is a spreadsheet, and I have more ideas than I have time to write. And I do have an idea for a fourth book in my only series that I've got going. And this will go back to what you were talking about earlier in our conversation with Kevin Tomlinson of this fourth book. The protagonist in it is going to be one of the side characters from the first book, who's a significant character, but he's a side character. And it's going to go back 20 years in time from when Vulcan Rising takes place. And it's in the same world. Um, but there's very little direct bearing on that story or the other stories. But I think that it's going to, not I think, it is going to move forward and introduce some of those characters that you're already familiar with. And I wasn't sure entirely about that. I mean, I know the bones of that story are interesting in my head, and the
Mhm.
tie-in to Vulcan Rising is interesting. But it was one of those, I don't know about using these characters in this story and going back in time. I mean, not like time travel, but just into the history in that world. And then, in that interview, he was talking about how it's effective. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's next. Maybe it's not, but it's definitely something that will be written.
I love that you're kind of being led by your interest. I mean, my pause and pastry series I started just because I wrote it in 3 or 4 weeks at the end of 2020. Pandemic, political news, everything was crazy. So I just sat down and wrote this cheerful little story about a woman who finds her husband cheating. That's no good, but she's inherited some money. She packs her car, heads out, and her car breaks down in a little town that she ends up embracing, and she opens a patisserie, and there we go. It's just been a lovely series, and it was so well received. I mean, I had fully intended it was just going to be a one-off, and people are like, no, no, what happened to Clara? What happened to Kurt? So book number two, and I will write more because I love writing that whole town in that series. So sometimes you just get, I don't know, led. And my Christmas club is based upon a homily I heard in church 30 years before I ever wrote the book. And, it was greatly fictionalized. But so I guess when I say I'm all that intentional, I do allow myself just to be led as well. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that going forward, now that I've got some things established,
Yeah.
will need to be more intentional about how I do it, because I really do think, I've got that third book in the Zaberi Chronicles, Forging Bonds, is coming out in a couple of weeks. I need to have the fourth book come out next year.
Yeah.
Um, I just think that is best to keep driving readers and not just have a haphazard backlist, but to have
Right.
intentional ways of people bringing people in and giving them a reason to come back to me with stories that they know.
Right.
And, maybe it's every other book could be something else. And whether those are
Mhm.
one-offs, like I see this fourth book being for now, although I have already had ideas of keep an open mind about the possibility of this, you know, having more story to follow. Um, but I see myself becoming more intentional about it as I go forward. But at the same time, everything to date, except that short story we've talked about, has been fantasy,
Mhm.
which I did not, which I didn't do intentionally. That, which I don't know, maybe that sounds really peculiar. Um, but that's not all the stories that I have inside of me and written down on my spreadsheets are not fantasy. So I also
Mhm.
want to go about establishing other genres early on so that I'm not just, and I don't want to say stuck, but so I'm not stuck in just this one thing. And
Right.
that's what people's
Right.
expectations is. So I know that early on, I need to
Yeah.
go ahead and establish, you know, there are going to be other genres, and you, you reader may not be interested in all of them, and that's okay. But that's a part of who I am and what I'm going to put out there.
Mhm. I think that sounds so smart. I mean, at some point, you do get to the point where, especially if you're trying to make your living at it, if people are buying a series, then you ought to be writing that series. So, I mean, that's just kind of the bottom line business sense of it that is obvious to everyone who's not merely a hobbyist, which I
Yeah.
think our podcast is for both, but yeah.
Well, and yeah, so for me, so for my series, I know generally what books 4 and 5 will be. And I don't have them plotted
Mhm.
or outlined or anything yet, but I know roughly what they will be. And I have enough characters who are, you know, have open ended things left that they could go on even as it exists now and be, at the forefront of future books.
Yeah.
So those are things that, I'm keeping in mind as I go forward.
I think that's so smart.
Well, let's do this. We've been going for about 30 minutes here. Let's go ahead and stop there. And then we will, we've had a great run of interviews. We'll figure out what our next topic is so that we can come
Yeah.
back with some new, continuing to come back with new and fresh ideas. In the meantime, we'd like to go ahead and ask everybody if you have enjoyed the podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on your favorite podcatcher, if you would subscribe, if you don't already subscribe, leave a rating, write a review, leave a comment. If you go to our website, which is rightapproachpod.com, and that's right, WRITE. You can reach out to us. Go, our individual author websites are on the links in the show notes. They're on the website. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions, comments, ideas. We'd love to hear from you. And we thank you so much for making us a part of your week.
Yeah. Thank you all. Happy writing.
Happy writing.